वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरिः ॐ।
My humble pranams at the lotus feet of Thakur Ma and Swamiji. Pranams and warm welcome to Swami Anilayananji Maharaj, our Assistant Warden of Sri Ramakrishna Vidyarthi Mandiram. I extend a warm welcome to Dr Usha Vastare and Mr. Praveen Shivashankar, the guests of today's KIP session. I also welcome all the students of Mandiram present here with us today. Today, we have a very intriguing and exciting topic at hand, the psychology of misinformation. As they say, our life is shaped by our mind. The mind is a very powerful tool, and all that happens outside is experienced through it. In this growing age of information, the term misinformation has gained more prominence today, and it's a huge problem too. To tackle this problem, we need to understand the science or basic psychology behind it. And today, among us, we have two experts in this very field. Firstly, someone we've all recently met, our very own Dr. Usha Vastare ji. Dr. Usha Vastare is the founder of Yogakshema Rehabilitation and Wellness Center, a not-for-profit organization working towards enhancing quality of life of people based on recent advances in neuroscience and positive psychology. Before returning to India, she was a resident of United States of America for more than 3 decades. She came to India with the aim of bringing the latest scientific advances to the doorsteps of common people. While in USA, she was a faculty of Temple University School of Medicine, Philadelphia, for a period of 17 years. Post her career at the Temple University, she also essayed the role of Clinical Research Project Coordinator at the Center for Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorders, Pennsylvania Hospital, Philadelphia, USA. She has published over 70 research papers and abstracts in reputed journals and contributed to 5 books used for continuing medical education course. She was academic research advisor for MDs, postdoctoral fellows, PhDs, and master's students, and has been trained in hospice care for terminally ill. In India, she has worked with Deenabandhu Children's Home, Chamrajnagar, and continues to work with various NGOs like Swami Vivekananda Memorial Hospital, Nivasa, a rural architecture NGO, Nisargopachar Kendra, and various institutions ranging from social to health and educational. She is a mentor for various individuals and organizations. Dr. Usha Vastare conducts support group meetings for various sections of the society ranging from homemakers, corporate executives, NGO staff, professionals to survivors of chronic illnesses and their caregivers. So far, she has conducted more than 1,000 plus such meetings. Her workshops are based on the most recent advances in neuroscientific research and positive psychology and are geared to improving the quality of life of people. Her programs have been telecast in leading television networks, Suvarna, Udaya, Chandana, Zee Kannada and others, as well as in radio and newspapers such as Vijay Karnataka and Udayavani in Karnataka. She has also been featured in radio talk shows in USA and South Africa and conducted workshops too. Dr. Usha Vastare's objective is to introduce practical and scientific methods to lead a holistic life with full of zest and meaning. This includes guidance on stress management, cognitive behavior therapy, mindfulness, conscious leadership, overcoming depression, art and science of forgiveness, mind-body medicine, etc. She brings in confluence of science and ancient wisdom in her talks, workshops, and even in her personal mentoring process. Her target audiences come from all stations and all walks of life. And next we have Mr. Praveen Shivashankar. Praveen Shivashankar is a Bangalorean at heart, even though he has been living out of a suitcase for past 12 years. An engineer by profession, Praveen is currently the Director of Products for BioConnect and works in biometric identification. He has worked on several national level projects, including the prestigious Aadhaar project in India. His global exploration for career and education has taken him to USA, Europe, Africa, and Canada. He holds an MS degree from Wichita State University in USA, and an MBA from McGill University in Canada. Praveen's interests include drawing, painting, creative writing, music, reading, trekking, and community service. Apart from his professional side, Praveen is also the Vice President of Yogakshema Rehabilitation and Wellness Center, a registered NGO in Bangalore. He is a published author with several of his independent works and translations having been published under various publications including Kannada Sahitya Parishad. The 12th century Vachana literature and its spiritual exploration in an area of deep passion is an area of deep passion for Praveen. Apart from the many Vachana compositions, the seminal book of Shunya Sampadane, a 13th century literary work, is another area of deep interest. He has been giving talks based on this work and the life of other saints for the past 5 years. Praveen is currently based in Toronto, Canada. So, my friends of Vidyarthi Mandiram, this is Mr. Praveen Shivashankar, and he's going to address all of us today on the topic of the psychology of misinformation. It's a very interesting and thrilling topic. I hope all of you have a very good time and an educative session. Thank you one and all. Over to you, sir.
Hi, Ramakrishna. A quick audio check before we start. Am I audible well enough for everyone?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Awesome. Thank you. Before we begin, I would like to offer my humblest pranams at the feet of Swamiji and my sincere, heartfelt thanks for inviting me as one of the speakers for today's session. And it's always a privilege, and I look forward to be engaging in this along with Usha Aunty. What you're going to hear today is a very abridged version of the detailed article that Usha Aunty and I co-authored for the publication for Ramakrishna Ashram, and it's always such a privilege to be a part of such projects. And again, my sincere and heartfelt thanks for everyone, and to the Vidyarthi Mandiram and its students who have always provided me a platform to be able to share whatever little I know of. And I'm not going to take too much of the time today. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack here. I'll quickly share my screen and let us get started. Please let me know if the screen share is visible.
Yes, sir.
Awesome, thank you. So today's topic that we are going to cover, as you know, is titled The Psychology of Misinformation. So before we begin our topic for the day, there is a question about why are we here? And there was a very succinct and well-presented introduction by our friend from the Vidyarthi Mandiram, where he said that we are in the age of information, and yet misinformation is becoming very prominent these days. And not just of late, but even several decades ago, one of the leading political thinkers of our age, Jean-Francois, he really set the stage when he made this observation. Today, as yesterday, man's major foe is deep within him, but the enemy is no longer the same. Formerly, it was ignorance. Today, it is falsehood. This was part of the opening remarks that he writes in his book, The Flight from Truth. And this sets the stage for why we are here today talking about the psychology of misinformation. We have often heard of the term, like, these apocalyptic writers, and they talk about these apocalyptic horsemen, war, famine, pestilence, which is like a significant disease like bubonic plague, which kills a lot of people, death. Many of these are really either features of natural causes or something that is rooted deep within our inability of receiving the right sort of knowledge, ignorance. But misinformation is really something quite different from what we have seen so far. It is in the age of information when there is a very concerted effort of actually deluding the minds of people, muddling it in such a way that we are unable or rendered incapable of distinguishing between what is truth and what is falsehood. Such is the gravity of the threat of misinformation that we are faced in this day and age. Because really, when we look at what misinformation or disinformation really is about, misinformation is false information that is spread, regardless of whether there is an intention of spreading that misinformation or not. They come in various flavors. There is a whole spectrum of misinformation, something that is very benign, even humorous in some nature. If you look at a lot of stand-up comedies, a lot of comedians, or even parodies, there's a lot of misinformation, but the purpose is very explicit. We know that it is humorous in nature, so it is not something that you have to take seriously. It could be factual, it could be based on facts, but it represents a very exaggerated perspective of it, and it is known that it is false information. For example, even if whether there is an intent of spreading it as a false information or not, one of the aspects that we have come across these days is like bathing in cow urine is going to cure COVID-19. That's a misinformation. How disinformation differs from misinformation is that disinformation is deliberate. There is an explicit intention of misleading or biased information, manipulating the narrative or the facts, and propaganda. So there is an ability whereby an individual or a group of individuals through various means will be able to, with a concerted effort, muddle and create confusion in the minds of people. One of the most famous narratives also that we find in this day and age, especially given the environment that we are living in, is that COVID vaccines have brain controlling properties and therefore will be used by the government to alter our brains. Or that COVID vaccines are going to interfere with some of your physiological aspects, and therefore it is going to hamper your normal lives. This is being used significantly to deter active vaccination efforts in order to contain the spread of the pandemic. While there has been the presence of misinformation, disinformation since ages immemorial. This is not something new, to be honest. What is different between what the situation was a few centuries or even several centuries ago and when we are talking about the 21st century is really the access that each and every one of us have to spread information. In the 21st century, we are talking about internet as a weapon paradigm. With the advent of technologies, with the advent of communication technologies, thanks to Moore's law, where the accessibility and the ability to produce much advanced forms of communication technology becomes so much more easier and so much more cheaper, the ability to fabricate images and videos, thanks to the advancement in our computing power, in the ability to compute data and mine data from various sources, generating deep fakes, which are fabricated images and even audio content, videos, is becoming much and much easier day by day. And not only that, broadcasting messages through instant messaging platforms or through social media is becoming very rampant and easy. All of this, of course, is enabled through data analytic algorithms that are trained to manipulate. The intention of data algorithms, the data analytic algorithms are multifarious. Many a times influencing the choices that people are going to make is agnostic to whether that influence is being used for good purposes or for bad purposes. And the manifestation of the threat of misinformation and disinformation is really when the data analytic algorithms are trained to manipulate the choices that people are going to make in such a way that it is going to have a rampant and widespread negative impact. And therefore, it becomes important to address this threat of misinformation and disinformation. And the way we are going to address this threat is again multi-layered. The obvious thing that comes to mind is like, is there a way that we can combat that using technology? Yes. Is there a way that we can combat that through regulation? Absolutely. In fact, there are a whole number of teams that are being deployed by various companies like Twitter, Facebook, Google, across the world, whose only purpose is to flag, filter, mark misinformation, people who are spreading misinformation, block their accounts, and all of that. But ultimately, we need to understand that there is a strong coupling that exists between the way we engage in spreading, in participating in the spread of misinformation and disinformation, and our belief systems, which really leads us to understanding, like, how is it that there is an interplay between what we believe in, what we think, and how we engage in all of this. Even if it is not just my words, one of the most reputed research institutions, Pew Research, conducted a survey in 2016 in America. And even there, you can see that majority of Americans, more than 60 to 80% of them, have said that fake news has left them confused about basic facts. They are not able to understand which is true and which is false. And almost 25% of them, that is about 1 in 4, have reported that they shared a fabricated information, whether they were aware of it or not at that point in time. And in fact, 13% of them did explicitly say that, yes, they knew that they were sharing a false information, and yet they did that. Why? And that why really brings us to the perspective of our own selves. And that is where we need to understand, why do we do what we do? And especially from the context of spreading misinformation or fake news, which is the most popular terminology of disinformation that exists in these days, which all of us are familiar with. It really comes down to understanding our own mind and our own biases, and the strong coupling that exists between the way we behave and the way we think and our belief systems. And for taking us through this neuroscientific perspective of how to understand our mind and the way it can trigger the different ways in which we engage in this misinformation, let us now move over to the section, and I request Dr. Usha Vastare to take us through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen. We have slides. If we can start off the slides. So, we have heard why information is so important, and if it is not accurate and if it is false, the impact of false information or misinformation, and the difference between misinformation and disinformation. In this slide, what I would like you to take is, what is information? We know information could be data, it could be numbers, it could be images, it could be some documents or even audio files, certain facts and some opinions also. And this information to be converted into knowledge, if we have accurate information, it can be converted into right knowledge. So the accuracy of information is extremely important. And not only should it be accurate, but also up to date and also in its entirety. Not partly true, but in its entirety it has to be accurate. And whenever we talk about historical facts and compare it with scientific facts, it's a totally different ball game and a different story altogether. We will get to that a little later if need be. But is this working at all?
Yes, ma'am.
So what we need to understand here is the difference between what is a fact and what is an opinion, and what about some manipulated facts. If we can understand the difference between a fact and an opinion, and also falsified facts or manipulated facts, it's going to be a big help for you to understand what is misinformation and what is disinformation. In fact, Harvard Kennedy School of Public Policy, they have come up with a term that it is information disorder. And I've just listed a few of those information disorders, and we need to be aware of what is this information disorder is all about, and also not just be aware of it, we need to beware of this information disorder, because the current generation, irrespective of age, whether it is your generation or my generation and everything in between, we are actually growing up with this information disorder syndrome. Or we're all growing up with this fake news. Entire generation, especially youngsters, they're growing up with this fake news. It's very alarming. We need to be aware of it and also beware of this fact. So, if that is the case, how to treat any information disorder is a natural question that follows, right? So, how do we treat this information disorder? Very simple, by developing a critical view against all information. This is one of the surest ways to treat information disorder syndrome. And not only that, how not to be a part of spreading this disorder. We need to be aware of both these aspects. It's extremely important. So, what is this information disorder? Why do we need to be knowing this? Because irrespective of our socio-economic, educational background, all of us, without any exception, we are highly vulnerable to this misinformation and disinformation. Not only that, and why? Why do we spread this type of information, which is actually pollution, information pollution, or this information disorder, in a mindless way, without even questioning whether this is true or not? This is the question that we need to ask ourselves. When we do that, then why? Why do we believe this misinformation and disinformation? And how? How do we prevent and protect ourselves from believing such information? And the way to go about is to be understanding ourselves. Understanding ourselves means understanding why. Why do we do this? How does our mind work? How does our brain works? If we can understand this, then we will know how not to be vulnerable for such information, misinformation.
What is vulnerable?
But that we can easily catch this information pollution. If it is like a disorder or a disease, it's if we have low immunity, for example, this COVID-19, if we have low immunity, so we become vulnerable to the disease or the virus itself. So in a similar manner, yeah, in a similar manner, how we are so vulnerable to this information, which is nothing but pollution. Information pollution is what we can call. And even WHO, UNESCO, all of them, they have called this as infodemic. The virus is causing pandemic, that's a virus. Here, the information is spreading like a virus, making it as an infodemic. That is that information disorder I'm talking about. So understanding how the mind and brain works is the way to prevent and protect ourselves. Is this okay? Protect ourselves from this information disorder. So for this, we need to understand from two perspectives. One is about our psychological constructs and also from a neurological perspective. So let us go into that and see how does the mind work to be able to be vulnerable for such information disorder. And to make it really, really, really simple, I'm just going to try and classify this brain or divide this brain into two parts for you to understand and follow this, which is the part that you're saying, the upper part, or just beneath the skull, the region of the brain is called, we can call that as higher center of the brain. And the mind that comes out of it, emanates from that, is nothing but higher mind, we can call, or in Sanskrit, we can call that as buddhi. And there are different types of buddhi or higher mind. We can classify that like viveka, you have heard about Viveka Shakti, Vivechana Shakti, is nothing but discerning power, to be able to know what is real and what is false, what is not real, and to differentiate between good and evil, short-term and long-term benefits, all of this. This is nothing but the discerning power. Also the willpower, the Sankalpa Shakti, as you know, and the Arivu, our own awareness, what you call as self-awareness. All of these are various different powers of our buddhi, or we can also call that as conscious mind, willful mind, rational mind. These are the different types of powers. And the part of the brain below that region, below what we usually call as cortical structures. You have heard this term in high school, right? Cortex, cerebral hemispheres. So beneath that cortex, the inner region, what we call it as lower center. And I've simplified this to the core, just so you can differentiate, just having two parts. So this lower center, even in humans, it acts very similar to that in any of the animals. And what we call as manas in Sanskrit emanates from this lower center in a simplistic manner. And whenever we are using this part of the brain, the lower center of the brain, we are on autopilot mode. We don't think too much. Without putting any effort, the emotions, feelings, all of that also emanate from this lower center of the brain. Without consciously thinking, we just do things. That is where that lower center of the brain and where the manas, or the lower mind, comes from. This much of neurological perspective is enough for you to understand the nuances of how can we not accept the misinformation, question it, and also not spread the misinformation too. In this, there is a paradox with what we just learned about the brain and mind. What is that? I said the region of the brain that is beneath the skull, which is called the higher center of the brain, is the part of the brain that truly makes us human, because that part of the brain, the higher center of the brain, is present to the greatest extent or highly evolved only in humans. That means as humans, we need to be using that part more and more, right? However, the paradox here is most of us are not using this part of the brain that makes us human, that is the higher center of the brain. And this is the newly evolved part of the brain when compared to the brain of the animals. In a similar manner, the mind and the buddhi, I differentiated between manas and buddhi. Buddhi is the one that we need to be using more and more and more, because as humans, we have a very well developed possibility of using the buddhi, right? The conscious mind. However, most of the times, except when you're studying or listening to something like this, when you're learning something new, then your higher center of the brain or buddhi is active. Otherwise, most of the times, most of the people, we are on that autopilot mode, which means we are using the manas and not the buddhi. This is the paradox. If buddhi is the type of mind, the higher mind, which makes us really human, and if it is the higher center of the brain that makes us human, it goes without saying that we should be using that more and more, right? However, it is the other way around. This is the paradox that we need to understand. And another aspect here is, whether we know it or not, our brain acts like a magician. Another word for magician is a genie. Our brain acts like magician. Just like a magician can give anything that you ask for, in a similar manner, our brain works like that. Whatever we ask for, it will give us. Actually, our brain is waiting for us to command it to give us something. The only difference between the real magician, wherein it just gives whatever you ask for, and our brain, which acts like a magician, is whatever we ask our brain, we need to work towards it. We need to act upon it to be able to make it work like a magician. So this is the difference. So rather than just wishing it to happen, we need to will it to happen, to act upon it to will it to happen. This is the difference. So if that is the case, do we have a proper the battery, is it working? Okay. What happens for most of us is we go for something that is easy and something that is very attractive, and we look mostly for short-term benefit, as opposed to something that might be time-consuming, maybe a little bit more difficult, but definitely more helpful and favorable in the long term. We usually don't do that. In other words, to put it simply, we want to do less, but we want to get more out of this. Do less and get more attitude is what many at times most of the people develop. Always looking for shortcuts. This is another caveat. Let us see how all this understanding from a neurological perspective will make us understand about misinformation itself, and how not to be vulnerable to the misinformation, and how not to spread misinformation. There is another paradox with respect to our brain and mind. And what is that? Whether we know it or not, we are always looking for something new, novelty. We want to look for something new. We want to read something new. We want to learn something new. Always we are seeking novelty. However, our brains, they have been evolved to be very efficient, energy efficient. And so, even though it is looking for novelty, it is looking for shortcuts, which means we don't want to work hard. We want everything to be easy, but we also want to score very high marks, right? So whatever, as little as we can read, but we want to get the highest possible. I see. I know this is our wishful thinking. We'll see how this is the way the brain has evolved to look for shortcuts. It works only at one level. But if we really want to be lifelong learners, to be successful, to be achieving, this doesn't help us. And we will see why I say this. And this is where, from the neurological perspective, we move on to some of the psychological constructs. And then there are many psychological constructs that will help us to understand why we go for this misinformation, disinformation, or even to be engaged in the social media so much when we know it is not as good. Still, we engage in the social media so much. All of that, there are many other constructs, but I have chosen just 4 of them for us to understand. So if we can understand these 4 psychological constructs, then it will be easier for us to be able to manage the usage of social media, to manage the engagement of social media to our fullest benefit. Now, for most of the people, it is actually hurting us to an extent that it has become an addiction. And in the medical textbooks, and especially in the books on psychology and psychiatry, they have introduced addiction to social media, addiction to the cell phones, which was never there about a decade back. It has gone to that extent. So let us spend a few minutes on each of these constructs and then understand ourselves. Whether we know it or not, we are thinking beings, that we know, but we are also feeling beings. We feel. We need to think and we need to feel. Both are extremely important. But the problem is, many a times when we have to be thinking first, we think much later. We do something very quickly and then think, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have done this. We think about it later. And when we have to act first and think later, at that moment we think, should I or should I not do this? This is where the confusion is. This is where we need the clarity. This is where we need the discerning power. This is where we need the vivechana shakti or the viveka to figure out when should we think first and then feel later, and when should we feel first, act upon it, and think later. In fact, the essence of psychology behind accepting and spreading this misinformation lies in understanding when we should think first and feel later, and also when should we feel first and think later. It's extremely important aspect for us to understand. As I go along, you will see, whenever I say think first, that means using the higher center of the brain, using the conscious mind, using the willful mind. Whenever I say that, think first. Feel is that using our lower center of the brain, or the non-conscious mind, or being on the autopilot mode. That is what I mean by these two. So let us take the first one as the dual process theory. This dual process theory was first introduced by William James. William James was a contemporary of Swami Vivekananda, as a matter of fact, but it was later on this dual process theory was popularized by Daniel Kahneman, and he actually got a Nobel Prize in economics, behavioral economics, for this aspect of dual process theory, which is nothing but a functional way of classifying our thinking processes. How do we think? Are there different types of thinking? How do we think? And he gives a different terminology than what I've been using, like automatic thinking, conscious thinking, and whatnot. We will see what that is. And this actually explains how, not only how we think, but also how we make decisions. And he says, Daniel Kahneman says, there are humans use two ways of thinking. One is systems one thinking, and the other is system two thinking. Let us see what each system one and system two thinking is all about. System one thinking, as I earlier used the word, we are most of the time on autopilot mode, which is, this is when our lower center of the brain is highly active, so that our non-conscious mind is very active. And he calls, Daniel Kahneman, broadly, it's a functional classification. So we will broadly say that as system one thinking. And it is much older, because as you could see from the neurological perspective, it is coming from the lower center of the brain, which is that part of the brain that we share even now with other animals. And that part of the brain works very similar to the other animals. So it is one of the oldest ways of thinking. Not only that, the system one thinking is also not only automatic, but instinctive. It's implicit, it's non-conscious, it's also intuitive, it's involuntary. We don't have to put any effort at all for this. And very, very fast. It's very fast when compared to using our buddhi for that matter. It takes a lot of effort to use buddhi. We will get to that in a minute. And this system one thinking, it makes use of shortcuts. Because it uses shortcuts, it is also sloppy. Because it is sloppy and because it uses shortcuts, it is prone to many errors. So it is incorrect at many times. When we react to something and then we regret later, right? That reaction is that system one thinking. So many a times it is prone to errors. But many a times we rely on this system one thinking because it is very fast and it is also effortless. And not only that, whenever we are stressed out, whenever we are tired, we are prone to thinking through that system one process. And what is very important to understand here is that our decisions, our thoughts, they are mostly linked with emotions, with the system one thinking. Rather than looking at it in an objective way, the system one thinking is highly linked with our emotions and feelings. But what we need to understand is very important. Emotions are not facts. Emotions are emotions. Emotions are not facts. That is why whenever we use the system one thinking, we are prone to make mistakes, and there are a lot of errors in the system one thinking because it is full of feelings and emotions, but very fast. That does not mean this is not good. We will see where system one thinking, is it useful? Is it useful at all? Absolutely. System one thinking is highly useful. And when is it useful to be using that system one thinking? Let us see. Whenever we are doing certain mechanical activities, like driving a vehicle, you're playing sports, many sports. At that time, you have to be using the system one thinking pattern. And not only that, whenever you're doing some repetitive action, you do a lot of Shramadan here, right, in the hostel. Any type of Shramadan that you do, maybe mopping the floor, sweeping the floor, sweeping the shrine, all of those are mechanical activities and repetitive actions. Those times you need to be using the system one thinking, because it is fast and it doesn't take effort. You don't want to be putting too much energy in thinking, how should I sweep? None of that, because it has become a habit. It has become a pattern. That is where it is highly, highly useful. Not only that, when there is some kind of an emergency, there is a kid which has gone into the swimming pool, and then you see it is drowning. At that time, you cannot think, you just have to jump into action. Your feelings and emotions have to be in play, and you have to jump in to save that child. That is when the system one thinking is in action. And as I said, playing any sports, basketball, cricket, you cannot think, oh, is this a curveball? How do I respond to this ball? How? None of that. You just act upon it, right? And also, you do bhajans here, some of you play certain musical instruments. At that time, while practicing, yes, you have to think, but as you have practiced, you cannot think. Even when you sing or when you play a musical instrument, it comes automatically. That is when the system one thinking is in play, or is happening. System one thinking is in process. So at such times, we are quite accurate in most of the things, and we are very effective, highly efficient too, because it's very fast and we don't use up too much of the energy. So in a similar manner, this kind of system one thinking also creates a major risk of both creating misinformation and also circulating and spreading misinformation, because you act upon your emotions and feelings. You don't think in an objective manner. Oh, for example, you get some kind of information from one of your closest friends. Just because it was sent by your friend, you start forwarding that message without thinking twice. It doesn't sound okay, but it has been sent by my close friend, so let me forward it. Or it could be from some religious leader or from somebody of some standing in the society. Because it has come from them, it must be correct, it must be true. Without thinking twice, without checking, we start forwarding. This is where the system one thinking is in vogue. And another aspect, many a times we get into challenges in life, whatever it may be, in our day-to-day life activities, we get into challenges because our natural tendency is to use our system one thinking as opposed to system two thinking. And this aspect, the marketing people make use of it to the fullest extent. So they use the popular figures to be able to promote. And you see, oh, just because your favorite cricket player is being used, and then you want to buy the same watch or the same something, right? So this aspect has been fully made use of by the marketing people. Now, how about the system two thinking? System two thinking, it requires a lot of focusing, lot of concentration, and it takes a lot of effort. That means we use a lot of mental energy whenever we use system two thinking. When do we use system two thinking? When we are learning something new, when you're studying. That is when you're using your system two thinking. When you're highly focused, when you're concentrating, you're using the system two thinking. So it's definitely not as fast as the system one thinking, but it takes up a lot of energy also. And from an evolutionary perspective, this system one thinking is much newer as opposed to system two thinking. And it's obvious because if you compare it to the part of the brain where this is coming from, this is from the higher center of the brain, that is the newest part of the brain, that part of the brain that makes us human, right? So we have to put in a lot more effort, a lot more energy and focus to be able to use system two thinking. And this system two thinking, it is also highly intentional, deliberate, conscious, calculated, rational, and willful, effortful. It is highly controlled. It is less efficient, and it is highly objective, but it is fact-based, not but, objective and fact-based, but not fast. System one thinking is fast, but system two thinking is fact-based. And the system two thinking is mostly detached from emotions. That is where, if we have to stop accepting and spreading the misinformation, this deliberate, rational, willful, effortful thinking is what prevents us to spread this misinformation. So what happens? What do I mean by that? Let us see. All it means is we need to consciously and deliberately think and make logical and yet objective, intentional and informed decisions. That is what it means. System two thinking definition would be that. So that is one of the psychological construct. Let us move on to the next one, which is cognitive miserliness. What does that mean? I've been saying, as humans, we look for shortcuts. We want to do less and get more out of it. That looking for shortcuts is for us to save effort. We don't want to be thinking too much. We want to do something really quick and fast and get the most out of it. So, in other words, humans naturally have this tendency to solve problems in very simple, easy, and quick ways to solve problems. We don't want to be spending too much time thinking, analyzing, logically going about solving a problem. If it can be done really quickly, we want to just do that. And that is where it is called as cognitive miserliness. And this is irrespective of somebody's educational background. Both people who are intellectuals and non-intellectuals, without our knowledge, get into this cognitive miserliness. If some information has been sent by somebody that we know, without questioning, without going deeper, we keep spreading that information more and more. This, not that this is not bad, it is okay, but this will help us to go along with our lives, just so we can survive. I just want to survive through this exam. Whatever shortcuts I can use, I just want to use and get whatever minimum marks that we can. That is what it is just existing. It is just going through life. However, if we need to evolve, if we need to become better students, better human beings, we need to get away from this cognitive miserliness. Because you'll see how both system one thinking and this cognitive miserliness, they are so interconnected. That system one thinking, which is very fast, is what leads to cognitive miserliness. And this aspect of cognitive miserliness is exploited by the internet trolls, because they know how to push our emotional buttons. And so they post very instigating comments on social media so that we react to those instigating comments through our feelings and emotions without thinking twice, and we start spreading the misinformation. So that's about cognitive miserliness. And the next is confirmation bias. This is one of the very important biases that each and every one of us have without any exception. So it's important for us to spend a little bit more time on this and to understand what is this. We usually think we are very objective. We think twice before we do anything. This is most of the people we think of it like this. However, we are not really as objective as we think ourselves to be, or as we would like to be. And this bias, whether again intellectuals or non-intellectuals, as I said earlier, everybody without exception has this confirmation bias. And having this confirmation bias, I'll go to the definition, you will see what it actually is. But before that, a little introduction about this. And this, having this confirmation bias actually impacts, or it comes in the way of making decisions in an objective manner. Extremely important for us to understand. So this confirmation bias is called mother of all biases. If we can understand this and try to overcome as much as possible, we can win a lot of things and overcome many of the other things. Because we have certain belief system. Each one of us have certain belief system, and we make certain assumptions. Not all belief systems that we have are helpful for us. We don't realize this. There are a lot of belief systems that are hurtful, or it will pull us down. So without our knowledge, again, because of this confirmation bias, we become prisoners of our own belief system. We become prisoners of our own assumptions that are hurting us or pulling us down. This is where, again, we need to think and look at it in an objective way. And now we can understand by this definition what the confirmation bias is all about. Why did I give that long introduction for this particular psychological construct? Because confirmation bias is the tendency for all of us to look for information that supports whatever we know already, that supports rather than rejects one's perceptions, one's belief system, one's attitude. And it does this typically by interpreting evidence to confirm our already existing beliefs. And we reject or we ignore belief that is contradictory to what we already know or what we already believe. We don't think of it this way, because even when we make friends, even when we later on take up a job, we want to make friends who are very similar to us, who have the same kind of interests. This is where it will put us or make us to exaggerate this confirmation bias more and more. This is what we call it as being in echo chambers. That means we make we make friends, or we go to places where we are comfortable and where people have very similar ideas. I'm not talking about values, just similar ideas and interests. This is where we, what we call it as, we get into the echo chambers. So what happens because of this? Because of the confirmation bias that each and every one of us have, and because of that, because we are comfortable with our own type of people, we just, it is, in other words, it is in a different way of looking at it. A frog which is very comfortable in its own well, that is how we are not exposed to many other possibilities. We are not exposed to many other ideas. And that is what it means by being in echo chambers. And that is what makes us and perpetuates the stereotyping behavior of people. And that stereotypical attitude is what limits us to look for diverse perspectives, diverse angles, and diverse people, to be with diverse people. Because if we are not exposed to many things, we will never be able to learn. And so confirmation bias is actually aids in creating stereotypes. And then we'll keep saying, oh, this particular community is going to be like that. That country, you never ever trust such people who come from that country. Or this type of people in certain socio-economic background, you shun away from them. So we create such stereotypes because of this confirmation bias. So we have covered 3 of the psychological constructs, and the last construct is what you call as cognitive dissonance. This is nothing but we have certain ideals, certain values. We all have that. But even though we have certain values, we don't act upon those values all the time. We don't act upon those ideals all the time. There is lack of harmony in what we believe and what we do. We believe one thing, we do another thing. And this is what causes uneasiness, discomfort, also causes stress, anxiety, and mental conflict. What do I mean by this? Because this is very important for us to understand. Because if this lack of harmony is not resolved, it leads to both moral and ethical dissonance. What do I mean by that? See, we have heard this in Sanskrit, kaya, vacha, manasa. There has to be harmony between what we think, what we speak, and what we do, right? When there is no harmony amongst these 3, in other words, we think one thing, we say the same thing, what we think, but we do exactly the opposite. Many times this is what we do. We think very positively, especially we are influenced by Swami Vivekananda. We think positive. We say Vivekananda's quotes verbatim, we say. But when it comes to action, sometimes we fall short of doing what we say. Or we think one thing, we say another thing, and we do something else. This is what is called dissonance. This causes such moral and ethical conflict when it is not resolved. Really important for us to understand. So when it is not resolved, we say one thing, we speak the same thing, when we don't do those actions, then that is what unresolved issues, right? What happens in those times? Let us see. When things are unresolved, we start rationalizing. Oh, I couldn't do this because all the reasons we give, those we think are the reasons, but they're actually excuses why we cannot do. But we think positive, we speak positively, but not act upon it in a positive manner. And we give excuses. Not only that, sometimes we don't speak the complete truth. All of that causes cognitive dissonance. This is so important. And take few of the rationalizations, few of the reasons that we give ourselves when we don't think, speak, and act in this in an harmonious manner. And these are some of the rationalizations and reasons we give ourselves. What's that? Says, oh, I'm only doing this because I have been told to do so. We don't want to go into the detail. I'll take an example of used car salesman. Okay. We know any used car will have certain problems. And the manager tells the person, the salesperson, not to reveal some of the issues that the car has. So you only talk about certain of the things and not talk about the problems. Because I have been told to do so. It's not my fault. I've been told to do so, so I'm doing this. This is the reason we give to ourselves. And also we think it's a reason, but it's an excuse. We say this, which is that same example. It's not completely true. We know it is not completely true, but at least we're not lying. We don't think not revealing everything is a lie. So not telling everything truthfully is the rationalization or the reason that we give to ourselves. It's partly true. It is okay. So everyone does this. So what's a big deal about it, right? We keep saying this. And not only that, oh, some of these things happen all the time. No one will come to know. We don't need to tell anything to anybody. These are the reasons we keep giving ourselves when we have made a mistake. Some mistake, whether it is a small error or a big mistake. Oh, these things happen. Nobody will know. Just cover it up and then come away. These things. And not only that, and then we say, oh, it's only a white lie. I didn't really lie. It was only a white lie. And white lies are not illegal. So it is okay. These are the reasons which are actually excuses or rationalizations we give for ourselves. And this is what, as we get older and older, it causes a lot of mental, moral dissonance and mental conflict and ethical dissonance. Extremely important for us to bear this in mind. So what happens because of all of this, our beliefs conform to our conduct. What do I mean by that? Whatever actions that we do, our belief system also changes because we constantly keep doing. We say positive things, we think positively, but we don't act positively. So because we don't act positively, our belief system also changes, saying, as long as you say it, it is okay. People only hear you, they don't see what you do. So talk positive, that is going to be enough. Our belief system itself changes. And there is deeper neuroscientific evidence for all of this, what I'm talking about, including the angle of neuroplasticity, which I'm not going to dwell on here, but it's extremely important for us to know. It is extremely important to be doing the right thing. Even if we are not saying the right thing and we are thinking the right thing, but even if it is difficult, keep doing the right thing. And that is where our belief system also will work the same way, because doing is important. Here I can give you an example with kids. When we were young, we did not know what was right or wrong. We were made to do the right things by our parents, by our teachers. That is how the belief system in children came into play, because they were doing the right thing, as simple as brushing their teeth in the morning. Let's just take a mundane example. The kid would not know what is correct or not, but it was made to do the right thing. And then it started believing, when it could understand, when we became older, then we knew, oh, that's a good habit. So that belief system came in a similar manner. We may be adults, but yet when we rationalize for these things, but just saying and thinking positively is not going to be enough. Putting into action, doing the right thing is what is important. So the reason it is so important, because over a period of time, this rationalization, it becomes a habit. Just thinking and saying things right is enough. Not doing is quite okay. So what happens? Whatever wrongdoings is happening, it becomes acceptable in our own mind. This is so important. We should never, ever let this happen, because we start seeing our own wrongdoings, which is not following it up in action. It doesn't matter to me if you cannot learn by heart, learn rote memory, to impromptu or to quote Swami Vivekananda's sayings. For me, that is immaterial. As long as you are acting upon Vivekananda's sayings, that is what is more important than eloquently saying Vivekananda's quotes. So do the right thing each time and every time. So that leads to the last few slides in conclusion. We talked about this. Why are we so vulnerable to this information disorder? And what leads us to spread this misinformation in a mindless manner? So we went over the different psychological constructs, the 4 constructs, and the neurological angle also. So for this, then what is the treatment for this information disorder, right? What is the treatment? First and foremost, I have to say that there is no cure for this information disorder. No amount of law, no amount of rules and regulations can stop this misinformation and disinformation. People will always find ways to spread false news, to spread wrong information, whether with the intent of harming others or not, immaterial. That will continue. So there is no cure. If there is no cure, then what is it? It's always about prevention. Prevention is the best treatment. Then how do we prevent this? This is where knowledge becomes medicine for this information disorder. What we're discussing today, what we're doing now is nothing but knowledge. this knowledge becomes medicine. This is how you treat information disorder. So to conclude, we know we are all humans, and because we are humans, we also have these innate biases. Those 4 biases that I talked about, the psychological constructs, without any exception, if somebody is a saint or a scientist, doctor or a patient, professor or a student, it doesn't matter. Every one of us will have this innate bias. We need to be aware of this and to be able to overcome. That is where knowledge becomes medicine. And we also should know, because of overload of information, as you rightly said, this is an era of information overload. We look for shortcuts. And we also create stereotypes, whether we know it or not. And most of the times we are on the autopilot mode. And lastly, but importantly, we say the right things. We think the right things, but many a times we fail to follow that with the right action. So extremely important. So what happens with that? Today, more than ever before, we need to have access to the truth. And we need to be able to distinguish between what is true and what is falsehood. Just like what Praveen talked about in the introduction, our enemy now is not ignorance, but it is falsehood. So we need to have access to the real truth. And in this polluted information environment, it is very easy to be misled. And in this polluted information environment, it is extremely difficult to know what to trust. It is not about who to trust in this era. What to trust, what information should we trust or we should not trust. It is not about who should we trust and who we should not. And this misinformation and disinformation has gone to such an extent that it is targeting and damaging our communities at a global level, not just in a small place or in just one community or a society in one nation. Globally, it is being affected. So we need to know how to protect ourselves from this information disorder. So we need to empower ourselves so that we can empower the society itself. And how do we do that? What is the solution? We need to be brutally honest with ourselves to overcome these biases. Some of them we saw just now. We need to be brutally honest. For that, we also have to develop healthy skepticism. Healthy skepticism so that we can use our powers of our conscious mind, as is mentioned earlier. It could be self-awareness, it could be focusing power, it is our discerning power, willpower. Use all these powers of our mind to question our own beliefs, and especially the ones that are hurting us. And to question anything and everything we read that we get through social media. Because even during Buddha time and even Swami Vivekananda said, don't believe just because I have said so. Put it into a test. Don't just believe what, if he has to say that. Now we are believing anything and everything that comes in our mobile, right? Through our phone. Never ever do that. Question. Develop a healthy skepticism and be mindful on a moment to moment basis. Mindful again is being non-judgmental. How can we be non-judgmental? To go to the root of the truth. or the root of the information to get the truth. So right thinking and right feeling is not going to be enough. Right actions are even more important. So develop a critical view against all information and do the right thing each time and every time. And I'm just going to leave this with one of the profound messages saying that do not mortgage your brain because it's highly dangerous. That is what we're doing now. Whatever comes without thinking, without using our objective mind, we believe and then we spread. So do not mortgage your brain. Thank you.
Satvik. ಯಾರ ಕ್ವಶನ್ಸ್ ಇದೆಯಾ?
Questions are
We have an expert in technology, Praveen Shivashankar. So this is the time, whatever questions that you may have, in English or in Kannada. ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರೂ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಭಾಷೆ. ಪ್ರವೀಣ್ ಕನ್ನಡನಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ರು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕನ್ನಡ ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ನೀವು ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷಲ್ಲಾದ್ರೂ ಕೇಳ್ಬೋದು, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ.
Namaskar, sir. I think you can hear me.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಆಡಿಯೋ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಿಲ್ಲ.
Praveen, we cannot hear you.
Oh, am I still not audible? ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಿಲ್ವಾ?
Sir,
Okay.
sir, my question is,
Yeah.
superstition, misinformation, or misinterpretation?
Yeah. What is the question?
It's
Superstition.
Yeah, superstition beliefs. Is it
Yeah.
a misinformation, or we are just misinterpretation of the information?
Very, very nice. Wonderful, wonderful question. I'm so glad you actually asked that. It is a mixture because and it depends on which particular superstitious belief you're talking about. At the end of the day, superstition, at the heart of it, it's a belief. And that belief, is it rooted because someone told you something and you believe whatever has been said? Or is it something that has just been handed down? ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ರೂ ಮುಂಚಿಂದಾನು ಅದನ್ನೇ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು, ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇದೇ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. We don't question. At the end of the day, superstitions many a times they are because both, originally ಯಾವ ಇಂಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ಇಂದ ಶುರು ಆಗಿತ್ತು, ಯಾವ ಉದ್ದೇಶದಿಂದ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಪದ್ಧತಿ, any sort of actions or tradition, it would have started with some particular intent at that age in that period of time. What happens is over the generations, we lose the perspective, we lose why it was essential at a given time, and it just becomes a mechanical process. What Dr. Usha was talking about, it becomes a habit. Habituation ಆಗೋದಾಗ it becomes mechanical and we just continue. ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು. So some actions, they had purpose when it was initially constructed, but over a period of time, the time changes. Desha kala alva, any practice is a construct of time and space. When these things change, we have to revise what we are doing and interpret in different ways. But we fail to do that. We stick to habituated patterns of behavior. So those are also going to eventually become superstitions. There are another set where initially they may have been propagated as a false belief, and they just stick around because it appeals to certain of those emotional constructs we have in our mind, the emotional biases we have in our mind, and they also stick around. So superstitions can be a mixture of both of these. Anything that you may want to add, Andy?
Nothing, sir. So in the same way, like some of the information we might be misinterpreting it, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't study it or we shouldn't.
Absolutely. Yes. And that is the whole message that we have given in the end when Ushanti said, have a very critical view about information that is being presented to you. That is what it means. You know, don't just, even whatever we said today, it holds even to our talk today. Think about it critically. Any message you get, whether it's a WhatsApp forward, whether it is an email forward, whether it comes with a quote unquote, a scientist who works in some place has validated and said that you should spread this to the world because, you know, the corporates or nobody wants you to know about this, but if you do this, things are going to change. Validate, check, question, and view it critically. Yes.
Thank you, sir. One more question.
Yeah.
The misinformation, we say like due to the technology these days, it is spreading faster. So
Yes.
one of the way for our who are living in cities is just know that we are actually scientifically advanced. So know by Googling or some other means that if the information is correct.
Absolutely.
But in villages, sometimes, though there is no influence of this kind of technology, still some misinformation might spread. So in those cases, how can those misinformations be avoided?
Like at the end of the day, again, the essence of the talk, knowledge. We are all quote unquote, like, you know, you said that, oh, we live in the city, we are advanced. I would question that. Even that information, that's an information. I'll question that information. Yakendre hallinalli ಒಂದು ಮುಗ್ಧತೆ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ, you know. But there's a whole different narrative. Let's not get into that. So what are we doing as quote unquote educated individuals? Are we spreading the right knowledge even amongst people who don't have access or ready access to such information? What can we do about that? And that is where it becomes important that, you know, whoever is knowledgeable about these things takes it to the doorstep of people. And that is where that ability to, you know, work selflessly, the seva that Swami Vivekananda spoke so highly of, you know, there are all different forms of seva. Jnana dasoha, jnana seva is about disseminating knowledge. So go to the villagers, explain to them, this is what it is, you know, this is how you need to stop from believing, you know, certain things. And this is work that has been happening down the ages through centuries upon centuries, and we need to continue to do that for sure. From a technology perspective, there are different things. You know, one of the suggestions would be like build apps that are in the local mother tongue. ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಆಪ್ಸ್ ಬಿಲ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ, ಯಾವುದರಿಂದ ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನದ ಮಾಹಿತಿಯನ್ನ, ವಿಷಯವನ್ನ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಕನ್ನಡ ಮಾತಾಡುವಂಥವ್ರಿಗೆ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡುವಂಥದ್ದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಬಂದಿದೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ? ಈ ಥರದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಖಂಡಿತ ಇದರಿಂದ ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನದ ಮುಖಾಂತರಾನೇ ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನದಿಂದ ಯಾವ ಯಾವ ದುಷ್ಪರಿಣಾಮಗಳು ಆಗುಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಉಂಟೋ ಅದೆಲ್ಲವನ್ನ ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನದ ಮುಳ್ಳಿಂದನೇ ತೆಗಿಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಹಾಗೆ ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡೇ ತಂತ್ರಜ್ಞಾನದ ದುಷ್ಪರಿಣಾಮಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಹತ್ತಿರಬಹುದು.
I am actually hoping all of you will get into that path. ಮುಳ್ಳಿನಿಂದ ತೆಗೆಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಇದನ್ನ ಹಿಂಗೆ ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಡ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿನೇ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಿ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯನಾ? ಅದೊಂದೇ ಅಲ್ಲ. When you go back, I know many of you come from many different parts of either Karnataka or outside. When you go back, bring this awareness to your own city, village, wherever you are. That itself is a huge thing. It's all about knowledge. Jnana aushadhi. Jnanave aushadhi agatividde. So, which is through awareness, educating.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir, and hello, ma'am. I am Anirudh. First of all, I thank for the informative content that you have provided us. So my question is that sometimes brain starts assuming things for itself. It starts its own imaginary world, and we don't get into the practical things that we are doing. So how can we overcome that and like come back to the original state of mind to prevent that imaginary things?
Sometimes it's okay just to imagine and we daydream. It is just imagination. When we know it is, we are just imagining, we can let that creative mind go. But when it comes to certain things, certain values, certain beliefs that we have, certain ideals that we have, certain values that we need to follow, just thinking about it is not going to be enough. That is what I'm saying. We need to put that into practice. But for example, planning, which is for the future, then you're daydreaming about it. That is quite okay. It will take some time for it to become fruitful. That's at the planning. Planning is at the thought level before it goes into the action level. So we need to know the difference between the two. Here, we say one thing, we think another, and do completely opposite. That should not happen. There has to be harmony. Because daydreaming is again one of the very creative ways of many times even calming ourselves down. But we should not just be daydreamers. We have to put certain of our plans into actions. That is also.
I got the point, ma'am, but sometimes the things go wrong. Like we have the ability to do, but we misinterpret the things that we are doing, and we go in a wrong way.
That is where if we do not have that discerning power, many times you're all still young. Youngsters have a lot of willpower. Elderly people have a lot of discerning power. So that is where a place like this, you have a great combination of both. There are people, Swamijis, who have so much of discerning power, viveka, and then you have a lot of willpower. Not that they don't have willpower, I'm not saying that. But when you are confused, when you're not sure, and you're not even sure why you're not following it into action. At those times, ask yourself, there are many different ways. Maybe you're just tired. So rather than wishing it to happen, rather than making it just a desire, convert that desire or a wish to a goal. Then we can follow the goal. If it is just a wish, it remains as a wish. It's a desire, it remains as a desire. A desire needs to be converted into a goal. So there is something that is tangible that we can work on. So let it not remain as a desire, but make it as a goal. Then it becomes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So because of misinterpretation and miscommunication, other people's life will be at risk. How to overcome it?
Absolutely. In fact, a few years ago, I think just in India, because of certain false messages that were spread on WhatsApp, several people were, brutally attacked, and many lost their lives because, I've forgotten the exact number, but more than it was in double digits. People who lost lives because someone forwarded a message on WhatsApp saying that they were doing in some activities, and they were hacked to death by the crowd. Again, all of this, whether it is as serious and life-threatening as that, or something even more malicious, where it spreads massive amount of misinformation and leads to certain crowd behavior, the herd mentality when it comes to adopting certain harmful practices. The question is, how are we going to engage in the way we spread these things? Tumba practical agi ondast ಹೇಳ್ತೇನೆ. See, anytime you get information about or content, usually where does all of this happen? It is with the outreach of social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat, all of these massive number of users, and they have what we already addressed as echo chambers, because we go into these groups because there is that need of validation and connecting with like-minded people. We enjoy that, so we go into these to form those connections. A herd mentality baratala, you go into these echo chambers. Whenever you receive an information that is I won't say that as an information, whenever you receive a data that actually says that, okay, there is someone who is doing something illegal and all of that, first and foremost, question, which is what we said, question, is this true? If it is so, you are not the authority to act on that information in a legal manner. The best thing you can do is forward that to whichever is the legal authority that can act on it, because there is a process that is in place. Most importantly, you can start observing for certain tags. Now, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram and all of that, you will get tagged that this particular message that you are receiving has been forwarded multiple times. You get a notification. Al barutte WhatsApp al open madadaga yaude ಒಂದು ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಅನ್ನು ನೀವು ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ forwarded many times ಅನ್ನೋದೊಂದು ಟ್ಯಾಗ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ. The moment you see that, immediately you need to question. That itself is a tag to say that this might not be true. And if you find out that this is not true, immediately on WhatsApp, on Twitter, on Facebook, there is a button that is now available which says report for misinformation, report for wrongful policy adopt, whether it is like a wrong picture, someone's picture has been morphed, it has been put on the website, all of those kind of things. Report it. Do not engage, even if it is some of your near relatives, friends, or someone who have forwarded it. Immediately tell them, please don't forward this. It is wrong. It is not right. It's a false information. Report it so that the concerned team immediately gets notified and they can act on deleting those messages from everywhere and all of that.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Question is, our mind accepts intuitive things very easily, but it will not accept counterintuitive things that easily. But today we can see the counterintuitive things has led to space exploration a lot of innovation. Why our mind works like that?
So if I understand your question, why is it that our mind accepts intuitive things more easily than counterintuitive things? Is that right? Yeah, so as we said, as we saw throughout this session, it is because we are tuned for energy efficiency. Anything that is intuitive, low energy consumption, easy, habitual, we flow that way. Alva, even in nature, everything flows from a region of higher density to a region of lower density. Anything that is counterintuitive is energy guzzling. That is where our buddhi annodun use ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಆ ವಿವೇಚನೆ ವಿವೇಕ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಬಟ್ ವಿ ಆರ್ ನಾಟ್ ವೈರ್ಡ್. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಏನಿದ್ರು ಈಸಿಯಾಗಿ ಆಗ್ಬಿಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಇಂಟ್ಯೂಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೌದು, ಓ ಹೀಗ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಹೀಗೆ ಆಗ್ಬಿಡತ್ತಂತೆ, ಹೌದು ಆಗ್ಬಿಡುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕೆ? ಇಂಟ್ಯೂಟಿವ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ ಅಪೀಲ್ಸ್ ಟು ಅಸ್, ಎಮೋಷನಲಿ ಅಪೀಲ್ ಆಗೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ದೇವ್ರ ಫೋಟೋ ಬಂದಿದೆ, ಈ ಫೋಟೋನ 15 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಫಾರ್ವರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಸಿದ್ಧಿಸ್ಬಿಡುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ವಾಟ್ಸ್ಆಪ್ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಫಾರ್ವರ್ಡ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ತಕ್ಷಣ 15 ಏನು 30 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಡಬಲ್ 2 ವಿಷಯ ಸಿಗತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದು ವಿಷಯ ಅಂದ್ರೆ 15 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಕಳಿಸ್ಬೇಕು, 2 ವಿಷಯ ಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ 30 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಕಳಿಸ್ಬಿಡೋಣ. ಡಬಲ್ ಬೆನಿಫಿಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಏನಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು, ಫಾರ್ವರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀವಿ. ರೈಟ್? ವೆರಿ ಇಂಟ್ಯೂಟಿವ್. ಕೌಂಟರ್ ಇಂಟ್ಯೂಟಿವ್ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಖರ್ಚು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಖರ್ಚು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ದಟ್ಸ್ biological. But the important and the most beautiful aspect about what Usha auntie ಅಂತಾನೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, Usha auntie has been talking about is nature ಆ ಥರ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ through nurturing we can change these things. ಬುದ್ಧಿ ನೈಸರ್ಗಿಕವಾಗಿ ಪ್ರಾಕೃತಿಕವಾಗಿ ಇದೇ ರೀತಿ ಅಂತ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಸರಿಯಾದ ರೀತಿನಲ್ಲಿ ತರಬೇತಿಯನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ನಾವದನ್ನ ಬದಲಾಯಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳಬಹುದು. ಆ ಶಕ್ತಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರಿಗೂ ಉಂಟು. ಅದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಸರಿಯಾದ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಈ ಜ್ಞಾನೌಷಧ ಏನಿದೆ it is going to become effective. That's the aspect.
Thank you.
Any more questions? There are questions.
Sir, I think the last question and then we can. So the last question is, I'm not degrading, but even today, even a man who earns 5 or 2,000 monthly has a smartphone of 15,000. Like even a masonry or even who doesn't have knowledge to use it, he has a phone. And the misinformation, like the one you told, like a message about some god and all those things.
Yes.
So this gets spread by those people very easily because they won't judge it, or they might not judge it. They might not want the advantages, but because of the side effects which they might have mentioned, like it is very harmful if you don't share and all those things. Is giving or is spreading of phones to these who are not still well educated enough, is it spoiling or is it making the misinformation spread faster?
Oh wow, this is a very multi-layered, complicated question. First of all, takshna heltene illi any place where we become the arbitrator for who should have access to what, it is a very dangerous territory. ಒಬ್ಬರಿಗೆ ಇಂಥ ಫೋನ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅವ್ರ ಕೈಗೆಲ್ಲ ಫೋನ್ ಕೊಡಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ? ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಇದೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ನಿರ್ಧಾರ ಮಾಡುವಂಥವ್ರು ಯಾರು? That is why when we started off, when Usha auntie also said regulation agli, pratiyondu agli, It is not the ultimate solution because all of those have pitfalls. The ultimate solution is going within ourselves. Now, let's come to the technical aspect of your question. Everyone has access to mobile phones, not even, forget even 15,000. Reliance gives you mobile phones on a loan basis for at dirt cheap prices. That is equivalent to 10 coffee day coffees that you might take. You will be able to get a mobile phone with 5G connection right now, correct? Now, access to technology in and of itself is not a problem because technology is agnostic, unfortunately. Like economics, technology is also agnostic. ಚಾಕು ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅದನ್ನ ತರಕಾರಿ ಹಚ್ಚೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ, ಇನ್ನೇನಾದ್ರೂ ಬೆರಳು ಕುಯ್ಕೋತೀರಾ, ಚಾಕು ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅವರ ವಿವೇಚನೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಇರುವಂತದ್ದು, ಹೇಗೆ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುವಂತದ್ದು. ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, and this is where I want to also draw attention to a pitfall within the technology. This is a very important question that you have raised, and I want to ensure, because I'm sure you would have taken notes. One of the things that Usha Aunty mentioned, very important thing that I want you to pay attention to, is that when we were talking about that dual process theory, ಮೆಕ್ಯಾನಿಕಲ್ ರಿಪಿಟೇಟಿವ್ ಆಕ್ಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಒನ್ ಪ್ರಾಸೆಸ್ ಥಿಂಕಿಂಗ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದೊಂದು ಬಂತು, ವಿಚ್ ಇಸ್ ಟ್ರೂ. ಅಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ಶಿ ಸೆಡ್ ಇನ್ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟಿಂಗ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಸೋ ವೆಲ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಟೆಡ್ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ಲಿ, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಯು ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಗೆಟ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಹ್ಯಾಬಿಚುಯೇಟೆಡ್. ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಗಿವ್ ಯು ಅ ವೆರಿ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಟೆಕ್ನಿಕಲ್ ಫೀಚರ್ which is called as infinite scrolling. If you're on mobile phones, if you have used WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, when you are scrolling, you continue to scroll till about a couple of years ago. There was no end at all. You could continue to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll because you were constantly getting feeds. ಹಳೇದು ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ರು ಏನೇನ್ ಪೋಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಮೆಕ್ಯಾನಿಕಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೀಗೆ ಸ್ಕ್ರಾಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ 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 ಅದ್ರ ಕಡೆ ಗಮನ ಇದೆಯಾ ಇಲ್ವಾ? ವಿ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಇವನ್ ಪೇ ಅಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ಟು ವಾಟ್ ಆರ್ ವಿ ಲುಕಿಂಗ್ ಅಟ್, ವಿ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಕ್ರಾಲ್ mindlessly. Why is this? This is a very specific technical design decision that was taken in this infinite scroll technology when it was developed, because we wanted to limit the ability for people to think and make decisions. There is psychology that has gone behind it. So when you're designing apps, tomorrow engineers, many of you computer science engineers, when you're going to go and design mobile apps, do not build these kind of pitfalls to, you know, have this habitual patterns of behavior and thinking triggered in people where they mindlessly can scroll and lose track of time completely. That is why, because of petitions and action against these technology companies, now on Instagram or Facebook you get a notification saying that all the updates that you were supposed to receive are over. Do you still want to continue to scroll? That should give you a moment. It's just that one moment where you can make a choice. Momentally, you can exercise the willpower, the discerning power that we have spoken about throughout this session, and choose to stop and close the app. So from technology, again, you can do this. This just goes to show how conveniently the technology was built to make it easy for people to forward. So ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಇಲ್ವೋ ಅವ್ರೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, earlier till a few months ago you could forward a message to n number of people at a time, broadcast ಮಾಡಬಹುದಾಗಿತ್ತು ಮೆಸೇಜಸ್, ಕರೆಕ್ಟಾ? ಈಗ in Facebook and all of these platforms, sadly, especially on WhatsApp, because even more than Facebook, WhatsApp, it's instant messaging, right? Now there is a limit. You cannot forward to more than 5 people at a time. And if it is a message that has been forwarded multiple times, the limit reduces even more. You can forward it to only one person at a time because it creates friction. The more friction there is, the more energy a person has to spend in forward these things, they will resist taking that action. So EDD, even if amongst people who don't have a lot of understanding, if technology can increase the friction to spread in the spread of false misinformation and all of that, it will to a certain extent reduce the spread. But is that going to solve? Absolutely not. As Ushanti already said, there is no cure, because if you stop it on WhatsApp, there is a whole new ecosystem called the dark web that exists, which even like within regulation also you cannot spot what the dark web is. That is how convoluted that whole ecosystem of dark web is. So ultimately, we have to work towards getting the right knowledge, developing the faculties of our mind for that discrimination or the discerning power, ಆ ವಿವೇಕ, ಆ ವಿವೇಚನೆಯನ್ನ ಬೆಳೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. And that is what I think, whether it is from an educational perspective, whether it is through seva, all of this should work towards developing knowledge amongst everyone, even amongst people who don't have, quote unquote education.
So any study, I think it gets better or sometimes also almost complete when we approach it in a scientific way. So this was actually one of the scientific way of approaching about the misinformation, the psychology of misinformation. I heartily thank from Swamiji and also from all the Mandiram students to Sri Praveen Shivashankar sir and Usha Vastare for this wonderful and thought-provoking talk and information about misinformation and the psychology of misinformation. By saying thought-provoking, I mean that we all have got some thoughts on which we have to work on, and we have to convert those thoughts into actions. So we promise, and we also request for more talks and some other topics also. So by this, I would like to conclude the program with Shanti.
पुण्डरीकाक्षः सर्वयज्ञेश्वरो हरि तस्मिन् सृष्टे जगत्तुष्टं प्रणीते प्रणीतं जगत् हरि ओम तत्सत् श्रीरामकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।